Hey you guys! So Dreams Beta ended a few days ago, and I felt like I wanted to show off some of this, well, the one thing that I managed to publish that I'm fairly proud of during that time. So here it is. It's called Hot Potato. It's a two-player minigame. The rules are similar to tennis in that the whole idea is to get the ball to the other person's side of the court. But the catch is it doesn't matter how many times it bounces. It matters how long it's been on that side. So instead of balls, they're grenades. And as a grenade exists, it has a fuse, and that fuse starts counting down. Now, whenever a player picks up a grenade, or whenever they release a grenade, that fuse resets. And it has a fairly generous fuse of 3.7 seconds. But then the other catch is that as the game is going, it is continuously spawning more grenades for each player to juggle and toss to the other person's side of the court. And this has a good bit of logic to it that I wanted to show off. Luckily, I had Dreams open when the beta closed, and so the PlayStation decided, I'm not going to update it on him and block him out. So, before I do update the Dreams beta, which inevitably locks me out of it, I'd like to actually go through and show you all of the logic that makes this thing run. Because it's my understanding that, it's not something that random Joe Schmo who's played the beta or who's going to play the game when it fully releases, not everybody's going to understand how the logic in this game works. So I'm going to show you what I've done. I'm going to start off nice and simple with this horrible mess of spaghetti. Alright? The way gadgets are wired together in this game brings a whole new meaning to the term spaghetti code. And this is a prime example of how not to do things. But at about this point in making the game, I didn't care how neat it looked, so I just made it like this. And it's all very tight and compact and impossible to read. But there are a couple of things that I did do right. And like this. This not gate is labeled game not over. So I understand that whenever that's sending an on signal, in simple English terms, I know that the game's not over. And that can be plugged into an AND gate that powers something else somewhere else. And there are other things, like the player 1 and player 2 zones. So this is the player 2 zone. So all this is a node. So it just takes a signal directly from that and puts it onto the circuit board in its own little box. So this is the player 2 zone. This is what would sense if where a grenade is when it detonates. So if a grenade is in this space and it detonates, and you see the tag that it detects as detonation, then it'll turn on signal and start sending a whole bunch of signals to all of this junk. And it'll do that with, player 1 zone as well. You see, it's looking for the same tag, but it's in the player 1 play area. And this is, like I said, this is fucking spaghetti code. You don't want to make your stuff look like this. Oh, jeez. This is mortar control. Very simple. It's just a timer and a randomizer. And the randomizer is going to pick any one of its 10 inputs every time it gets an input and send it to one of those. And what these are, I've called them mortars. These basically are where the grenades come from. So whenever the timer goes off, which is set to 8 seconds, it'll drop a grenade somewhere or from one of these squares, and it'll drop it right into it. And obviously there's an even chance of it dropping on either player's side, so it's, anybody's guess as to whose problem it is when it first drops into the play area. That's pretty simple. This little microchip is just sort of the end game thing, and I'd label it now, but there's no point in me doing that because it's not going to carry over to the main game. So this basically just says, hey, make everything dark. And, here, what we'll do is... Okay, never mind. I can't show you. I'll show you later when we're actually testing it. It just prints a little message on the screen, and it changes everything dark. This area up here is a little, is a bit of some little introduction to the game. So there's some text boxes here that all, you know, display different things. And this is a sequencer, as I've made it. Now, this is labeled a tad bit better, but not much better. At least everything is, you know, not grouped up so much. This is a 1 second pulse. Simple logic that I made before. Basically all it does is takes, you know, a pulse in, and as soon as it takes that pulse in, it sends out a pulse, but only for 0.1 seconds. This is useful in a couple of things. Say you want, well, I'll give you an example later on. There is an example within all of this, where having a 1 second pulse is very good. The only reason why I have it for this is that it triggers a sound, and I don't want that sound to start repeating, and I don't know why I did it like that, actually, honestly. That could probably get rid of, but I don't feel like doing it right now because, well, I don't feel like fiddling with it, and either way, it's not going to carry over to the main game anyway. Basically, all this is a selector gate, and there's this, one of these is a timer that, I think it's this? Okay, yeah, this is the main timer that's basically cycles every 3 seconds, so with each given part, we can even see it in action. With each part, you'll see it'll go for 3 seconds, and there are some points where it'll get overwritten and go ahead before the 3 seconds is up anyway. And that's just a little bit of the game going. But it's just a little thing that just tells the sequencer to go. And a switch here so that, you know, if for whatever reason I don't want it to go, it doesn't go. Yeah, easy peasy. And there are actual sequencers, and if I can remember where they are, timeline. There it is. This is a sequencer. I'm sure you could put things on it. I don't know exactly how it works. I didn't try it because I didn't think to look in the animation to get to it. But I'm sure it would be as simple as, you know, taking one of these and just throwing it on there. And wow, golly gee whiz, it literally is that simple. You know, a little late now though. So we'll just get rid of that. That should be it. Oh, these are the players. As you can see, there's this little thing in front of his hips right here. That's not, you know, by accident. This little tag is labeled 1 hands, and if we were to look at player 2 over there, his is labeled 2 hands, because he's player 2. Go figure. And that button is, or that tag is connected to the button R1 right here. So whenever R1 is held, that thing is ready to go. Or, well, it's sending an on signal, so it's allowing itself to be known as a tag by anything that's sensing for that tag labeled 1 hands. And then there's this other tag that's just labeled 1. So this tag is his just player 1 as himself, and then these are his hands. Hands, you know, in quotation marks, so to speak. It's not, obviously, it's not his actual hands. It's a little box floating in front of his pelvis. That's the basics of the puppets. That's the end game thing. Oh, and let's get into the mortars. The mortars are just emitters. That's all they are. And we can go ahead. Okay, this is the grenade, or also the potato. What did I save it as? I saved it as the potato, but the circuit says it's a grenade. Okay, this is where all of the magic happens. This is a grenade's brain, and I've divvied up all the little things that the grenade is meant to do into different circuits, labeled easily, so that I can, you know, tweak whichever individual part that I need to at any given time. This would be the ideal way to do it. A little bit better is if I made this bigger, but you don't have to make it bigger. I like it when it looks smaller. It's easier for me, and I don't get overwhelmed like, oh geez, there's a whole bunch of empty space. I need to fill that up with something. This is really easy. And so this is the sound. The sound is very simple because it is... Here, I can recreate it. I'm not going to press the play button, but this is what it sounds like. Or something like that. Alright? I recorded this sound myself. And that's it playing through the game. That's really simple. That's just me hitting the side of my metal bed with a multi-tool to get that, you know, the ping sound that I think a grenade would make when it hits the ground. And that's all that is that's an impact sensor, and whenever it sends an on output, it just triggers the sound and, you know, makes it ping. This is the throwing mechanism. A little bit more to this one. And I did a rather shit job of labeling these things, but these things are, this is fairly straightforward because there's not a whole lot. Alright, the way I wanted the grenades to work is you wouldn't just be able to pick them up and throw them at max velocity, you know, as soon as you've picked them up. I wanted there to be a bit of a charge up. So that's what this is. It's not intuitive, I know. It doesn't make any sort of sound. Maybe when the full game comes out, I'll probably add some sort of sound indicating that it has to charge up before you can just toss it. But it's not very long either. It's 0.6 seconds. You just hold it for that long. And it's analog as well. So whatever amount that you get it to charge up, that's how hard the guy will throw it. And that's connected to the power button of the mover. Now what I've done is I put the mover in a microchip itself, and in a microchip which itself has its own power. So the analog signal of the timer is going into the power of the mover, and I have a digital signal coming from this timer that basically says, you know, as soon as you let go of the button to throw it, send a 0.2 second pulse to it. So it allows it to move at whatever rate this thing was going, or at whatever rate this thing wants it to, for 0.2 seconds. And this is just a simple, you know, on-off signal, and this is, you know, an actual value that determines how hard the throw is. And this is just a bit of logic that says, you know, alright, he's holding it now, so charge up the throw, and he's let go of it after it's already been held, so, you know, throw it. That's pretty simple. Here's the grab logic. This is my baby, alright? I colored it differently from everything else because I'm rather proud of this. This bit is the good bit, because, you know, you can't throw grenades around if you can't pick them up. And there's a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of right off the bat when you think, oh, I'm going to make it so that the characters can hold it. So it's very simple. It just works on a follower. Alright, so remember how each character had hands, that little tag that was in front of their pelvis, that one right there. Well, you go over, back to the circuit board, and you see this is labeled, no, not that. This is labeled 1 hands. Alright, so this is looking for the tag 1 hands, and the sensor itself is called held by 1. So held by 1, the sensor, is looking for the tag 1 hands. And this is held by 2, is looking for 2 hands. This is the way that you would want to label your things. The circuit board is labeled, and these are labeled. I should have labeled these, but for the most part, things are labeled in here. So this says, it's held, and this says it's not held. It's pretty simple. It's a NOT gate connected directly to the end of this thing, so why not, this is held, this is not held. Easy peasy. This is a sensor for the round end, so basically, whenever the round ends, whatever grenades are still around freeze wherever they are, and they aren't able to be held anymore by either player. So they just freeze in place, you can't interact with them, and it basically just allows the fuse on all of them to count down so they detonate and destroy themselves. So they just self-destruct. And not necessarily all at once, just, whenever their fuses detonate. So that's what that does, and this little bit tells it, whether or not it can be held. So these themselves have power, and they can only send an on output. It's a bit like an AND gate. So if it senses something and the thing itself has power, then it can send power to all the other bits that tell it, to do all these things. So we want it not to be able to be held while the round ends. So we have that connected to an AND gate, and that's powering each of these. And that's what that is. It's power to 2 sensor, so the grenade can be held by player 2 and held by player 1. All the grab logic, almost all of it, is in the grenades themselves. All the players have is that little tag on them that tells you where their hands are, and that's what these followers are following. So when it's following when it's held by a player, say player 1 is holding it, it's following that tag, and it's following it at Mach speed, so 1,000 meters per second. So no matter how fast the character is moving, it's always going to be staying there. Another thing is that grenades don't have collision, don't collide with players. So you don't have to worry about, kicking grenades around by accident. But grenades do collide with other grenades. That is, so long as they're not being held by a player. There's a couple of weird quirks. Now, the not necessarily intuitive things that you might think of is, well, what happens if there's a grenade being held by player 1, and it gets close enough to player 2, and player 2 tries to grab said grenade that player 1 is already holding. And this basically says, so if player 1 is holding a grenade, then it tells the AND gate, tells one of these fancy things over here. Okay, yeah, so say player 1 is holding a grenade, so that means this thing is on. That turns off power for this one, so it's not possible for player 2 to take control of the grenade as long as player 1 is holding it, and the same goes the other way. Now, what if player 1 is holding a grenade, and player 1 walks to another grenade and tries to pick that one up? Well, this says the grenades say, when it's held by a player, it lights up this corresponding tag. So this is held by player 1, this is held by player 2. If it's held by player 1, it turns on this tag and it tells all the other grenades around it, hey, I'm held by player 1, which then tells it, alright, well, if he's held by player 1, then none of us can be held by player 1 for as long as that tag is active. And that's what this thing does. So this says it's held by player 1, and this is a NOT gate, and that's part of the AND gate that powers the sensor that allows you to hold the grenade. And then there was another funny thing. This is the area This is how close you have to be to a grenade in order to pick it up. This little green zone around it. And what if there are 2 grenades equidistant away from the player that can be picked up? Well, basically, that's what this is for. This is a fairness policy. And all this says in this tight little package is that, alright, so it's going to take a bit of time before, between pressing the button to pick up a grenade and it actually getting picked up. And in that time, it is basically deciding which grenade to pick up. And whichever one, I've decided, the priority should be, whichever one is closest to detonating is the one that should be picked up. So it'll immediately reset. I'm realizing now why this doesn't work. Alright, spoiler alert, this doesn't work. Alright, none of this actually works. It doesn't do its job, and I'm realizing now why it doesn't. But basically, it would say, there's a timer elsewhere in this little bit of logic that as the grenade is, cooking, so to speak, this timer is going up, and that analog signal is going to, or is set to go to this. And this tells this timer, which is set to 0.1 seconds, how fast to count up. And whichever one is closest to detonating is going to count up faster. And therefore, one grenade is going to be, activated before the other. And whichever grenade activates is going to immediately get picked up, and by the consequence of, the held by one, things over here, it'll by consequence tell it, alright, there's a grenade being held by one, you can't be picked up by player 1 right now. And therefore, it won't do it. Yeah, without this, and also with it, because, like I said, it doesn't actually work the way I wanted it to, what ends up happening is if you try to pick up 2 grenades at the exact same time, they will both go to player 1, or whichever player is trying to pick them up. And because collision is turned off for between both the grenades, they'll just occupy the same space. And as soon as you let go of them, collision will turn back on for them. They'll start jittering around, freaking out, and then fly off in different directions. Alright, that's an issue. But that's all the grab logic. And throwing, I've done. The fuse. Now, this is back to how you shouldn't be laying things out. Nothing is really coordinated, and it's all just a bunch of stuff. These 1-second pulses. Now, this is important because there are 3 different scenarios where the fuse... So, this is resetting the fuse of the grenade, which is this timer. 3.7 seconds. But you want to send a pulse to this timer, because if you just have a strong signal, like a constant signal going to it, well, as soon as that strong signal gets initiated, it'll start the timer up. But there's no way to, start it up again as long as there's that strong signal. You have to turn it off and then back on again in order to get it to reset. So that's why I have these instead. There are 3 different scenarios where the fuse on the grenade gets reset. There's when you pick it up, when you throw it or let go of it, and this one is for, it takes a bit of time for the grenades to fall from where they are to actually get down into the play area. This is out of view of the camera. I don't want them, spawning out of thin air. So I put them all the way up here, so you just kind of see them falling from the top of the screen. But it takes some time for them to get there. So this is just a one-time thing where after 1.3 seconds, after the grenade has been summoned into existence, and only once, it will send this pulse that will just reset the fuse, so that once it hits the ground, it'll be a fresh grenade. It won't have any time on its fuse, so you don't have to worry about that as a player. There's just a couple other things. This is an emitter. isn't emitting anything for some reason, and I don't know why. This is a destroyer, so, you know, when the grenade actually does explode, it gets rid of it. And it's meant to leave the explosion behind, which is what this is supposed to emit. I don't know why there's not anything in its emitter. And there's a sound. Oh. Yeah, that's the explosion sound that I decided to make with my mouth. Because I decided, for some ungodly reason, I didn't want to use anything that anybody else had made. Though I probably should have. So there's one funny thing that I thought of that a player might be able to do. Say player 1 is holding a grenade, and he walks all the way up to the edge of this. This is also an invisible wall that the player can't cross, but grenades can. What if the player is holding a grenade and just brings it up to the wall? Obviously, they're not going to be able to get across it, but the grenade will be on the other side and will be in the other person's zone, and there's nothing this guy can do about it. Because player 1 is holding the grenade, and it's just going to detonate in his hands, but it's going to detonate on his side. Well, what I've done here is that if a player is holding a grenade that detonates, no matter where it is, it doesn't send the detonation signal. It instead sends a player 1 loses or player 2 loses. Depending on, you know, who's holding it. If somebody is holding it when it explodes. Now, this is just for, you know, funny little tricksters who think, oh, I can just cheat the game and just detonate it on the other person's side, and there's nothing they can do about it. Well, if you do that, you lose the point. Speaking of points, this over here is the, let's see if this works. Yeah. That's P2 score, that's P1 score, and that's a little hyphen in the middle. Obviously, from here, it doesn't look so good, but I promise you, when all of this is out of the way, it actually lines up and, you know, doesn't look like complete dookie. There's also a text message here. Oh, right. This is the player 1 and player 2 wins, depending on, you know, obviously who wins at the end of the game. The game is first to 5. That's how the game is won. And that's basically all you know. So I'll give you a bit of a demo. Obviously, I'm one guy. It's a 2-player game, so I'm only going to be playing as player 1. But here it is. Those are keyboard sounds that I recorded, by the way. You see the controls up in the corner on the top left. Basic twin stick controls. R1 is to, you know, grab a grenade, you release it to let go of it. Like I said, you kind of have to charge it up. There's another little thing. This game has a bit of tech to it, which I'm very proud of. You know, first thing I made in Dreams, and it already has a little thing that it does, like, you know, not by the intent of me, where you can throw a grenade farther, or more linear, I should say. So, if you look at the grenade, it's kind of... I'll do it again. Look at the grenade, and look at how it rotates on the pitch axis. If it wants to send one over to my side. I guess that's the problem with pure randomness, isn't it? So, as I'm throwing the grenade, you can see I can change which way it kind of goes. It can either go up a little bit more or forward a little bit more, and that's because the way that the grenade rotates when you jump. Because the way that the grenade works, if we go back, alright, that is the way that the grenade is thrown. It's thrown very, like, vertically up. But as you jump, it kind of has a tendency to rotate to try to face the player. And that's the other thing, is that we have this thing. So this is the arrow that it faces towards the player. And it also is told to keep the grenade upright so that this thing isn't, you know, spinning around and it doesn't throw it like to the left or right. It just throws it up like it's meant to. So this is always putting the back of the grenade to the player, but as the as the player jumps, the grenade lags behind. So at the start of the jump, the player is higher, so the grenade tilts like this, and it forces this arrow to start facing downward. And then at the peak of the jump, it's back to normal, but then as the player falls, it's still lagging behind. So the player is a little bit lower than the grenade, and so it starts looking more up like this. And you can throw it straight up when you're, you know, descending. So what I found is the best way to guarantee that you throw the grenade as far as you can is you jump, and right as you jump, that's when you let go, because that's when the grenade will be tilted like this, in order to, you know, because it's lagging behind the player. A little bit of tech that I didn't intend to put in there, but you know what? It adds a bit of depth to the game that I didn't intend for it to have, and I'm glad that the very first thing that I made has that. And it's not too complicated for, you know, such a simple game, but it is very much there, and it's very cool. Anyway, that's Hot Potato. There's gonna be a bit of time between, you know, the beta being over and whenever Media Molecule decides to fully release the game. I hope this gave you a bit of an idea of how the logic in Dreams works. If you want to get a real head start on figuring it out, though, my best tip to you is get a PlayStation 3 and a copy of Little Big Planet 2. Because they basically ported almost all of the logic directly from that. Having played that game, I basically just came into this already understanding how to use everything. Which is, you know, very helpful, and I'm going to have a lot of fun messing around with all the different things in this game. That's all I have to say about the logic of Hot Potato. You can expect more videos like this when the game does actually come out. And golly gee whiz, it's going to be a good time, so stay tuned. Rainbow video is coming up, I promise. Bye-bye.